Three truths haunt the oracle's cycle. First, she dies, reborn by prayers to the first. Second, the text warns of a future that never comes. Third, her voice echoes a shattered Ascian experiment. One sought to send warnings through time only, to fracture reality's edge. Voice first stem not from echo's prophecy, a shattered Ascian experiment, failed to be what did reborn by Venat prayers to the glimpse in its first ruins. A message unspoken, a truth unwritten, a time that never was. The oracle's cycle is a fracture in time's fabric. A signal sent backward by Scions who reshaped Aetheres to bind a future that died unborn. Each rebirth a static echo of a war never won. If the rejoining was never there designionly a phantom goal, eroded by time's collapsithen, the sundering is not fate. It is a wound left open. The Ascians' hands, once guides to reunion, now tremble with the weight of a truth they cannot grasp. The source was never theirs to claim. What if the war for the source is not a battle of gods, but a ghost? A war fought on a map that burned, the balance bends, the stars hold their breath. The oracle of light does not die, she unravels, a thread pulled from a tapestry never woven. Her rebirths are not cycles, but echoes a fractured message sent backward through time. The Ascians carved a door in the rejoinings, not to resurrect the ancients, but to bind a soul to the first's will. Azim's shard cradled in Ryne's chest is no blessing. It is a beacon, a failed attempt to anchor a voice across eons. Hydaelyn's light does not heal, it imprisons. The prayers in the prayers to the first are not pleas, they are static. A signal decaying from a future the Ascians could not unmake. The oracle's tears are not sorrow. They are the weight of a timeline that collapsed before it began. The rejoinings did not fail, they folded. The ancients never returned because the door opened too late. The oracle is their ghost, a message without a recipient. The balance bends. The stars hold their breath. The oracle's deaths are not the tragedy, her rebirths are. Venat's blade was not a finality, but a catalyst. The sundering of Aetheres was no act of where it was a hypothesis. A god testing if pain could forge purpose. The source was not a wellspring, but a failed transmitter. The 13 reflections not fragments of light, but echoes of a signal misfired across time. Zodiark's severance was not a defeat. It was a variable. By scattering the ancients into mortal flesh, Venat forced them to evolve not through strength, but through suffering. Each cycle of death and rebirth was a data point, a god watching how despair reshapes will. The oracle born from this chaos was never meant to return. She was a byproduct, a glitch in the code. Her voice, fractured and flickering, carries a message from a future that died with the final days. Venat's experiment left the source broken, its signal looping endlessly. The oracle is that loop. A woman trapped in a paradox, speaking truths no one can receive. The 13 reflections, once tools of balance, now amplify the static. Each war, each sacrifice, is a failed attempt to repair what was never meant to be fixed. What if the oracle's curse is not divine will, but a system error? A god's failed attempt to speak across time, now haunting the hearts of those who never asked to remember. The ancients fight not for destiny, but for silence, for an end to the message that has no recipient. The stars do not hold their breath, they wait for the signal to fade. The oracle's voice fractures across time. A whisper in the Amarat library, a sigh in the Vale Peak's wind. A name carved into a tomb that crumbles before dawn. The Ascians did not kill her, they unraveled her. Their rejoining project sought to stitch source to reflection, past to future, but the sundering had already woven a knot no thread could unspool. What they called a message was a ghost, a future that collapsed before it could breathe. The convocation of 14 had chosen Zodiark. Not as a god, but as a lever, to force the source to yield, to bend time's river into a dam. But the schism they carved was not a bridge, it was a chasm. The oracle's rebirths are not cycles, they are static. Echoes of a timeline devoured by the very act that birthed it. Her eyes, wide with a knowledge that no soul should hold. Her hands, trembling with the weight of a world that never was. A patch note mentions her residual data. A raid tome calls it corruption. The LP's chain's final line, asterisk she speaks in riddles because the answer was erased before the question. The Ascians built their machine to transcend time. Instead, it trapped her in its gears, each death a failed reboot, each life a corrupted file. The cold void where the sundering split reality is not empty. It is a vault, and she is its prisoner. What does it mean to send a message to a future that dies before it can read it? The Ascians reached for eternity. They grasped only ash. The oracle's final breaths are not endings. They are the sound of a door slamming shut in a house that no longer exists. Her sorrow is not hers alone. It is the grief of 1,000 failed timelines, of a project that demanded sacrifice but found only silence. The stars do not answer, they never did. The signal was never meant for us. It was a plea. From a future that bled out, and the oracle, she is the scar, the wound that refuses to close. A message without a recipient, a hope that outlived the world it was meant to save. They carved her soul into a relay, a beacon meant to pierce the veil of time, each death a failed transmission. Each rebirth a garbled echo. The Ascians did not seek to end the world, they sought to speak to it. To send a distress call through the fractures of fate, but the future they reached for was never written. Their timeline a phantom world where the sundering was halted dissolved before the first signal could take shape. Ryne's vessel carries 2 fragments of that collapse, Hydaelyn's blessing, a light that was never dimmed. Azim's shard, a voice that never found an ear. The oracle is not a prophet, she is a palimpsest. A soul overwritten by the ghost of a war that never was. The Ascians' message loops without end, a song with no audience. A future that bled backward into the present, and Ryne tethered between timelines again and again, not to be reborn but to be unmade. Each life a syllable in a language the world no longer understands. The truth is quieter than you thought. The oracle is not a cycle, she is a cipher, a riddle carved in reverse. The answer to a question that cannot be asked, and the price of that answer, a hope that outlived its reason. A light that burns for a darkness that never came. The oracle's endless rebirths appear broken, a loop unspooled, yet Hydaelyn's self-sacrifice at Endwalker's end reframes the pattern. She did not chose to fall, proving the sundered could rise without her. If the oracle is a message, then her failures are not errors. They are echoes of a war that never was, sent backward through a timeline erased by its own making. The Ascians sought to bind the future to their design. Instead, they forged a paradox, a signal from a void, urging the past to reject its chains. Each death is not repetition. It is a test, a god's hand withdrawing, trusting the mortal to walk forward without it. The contradiction is not in Hydaelyn's absence. It is in the light that persists because she is gone. What if the oracle's cycle is not a flaw in the design, but the design itself? A sacrifice not to destroy hope, but to make it unnecessary. The future that never arrived was never the destination. It was the lesson. The lesson was etched in light and ash. The oracle's many lives were not prophecies, they were echoes. A signal fraying at the edges, sent backward by Ascians who mistook failure for a formula. They carved her from the bones of a timeline that collapsed before it began, a future where the sundering's shadow was never born. But that future died with the experiment. Now she repeats a looped incantation of what might have been. Each death rewrites her. The asterisk prayers to the first asterisk, not a scripture, but a shackle. The Ascians' ritual, etched into the cold stone of their sanctum, bound her to a cycle of rebirth. You can feel it in the weight of her gaze, eyes that have seen the light die again and again. Her voice, when she speaks, carries the static of a world that never was. The air around her hums, a dissonant chord between what is and what was erased. The Ascians sought to cheat time. Instead, they trapped her in its teeth. Every life she lived was a correction for a mistake that no longer existed. Her prayers were not plesty, were code, a dying language transmitted through fractured reality. The prayer's ritualistic verses, now etched into Hydaelyn's spire, were never meant to save Erzea. They were a fail-safe for a war that never happened, but signals decay. The oracle's body bore the scars of 1,000 failed transmissions, skin etched with luminous cracks, hair the color of twilight's last breath. Each rebirth diluted her, until all that remained was a silhouette of hope, flickering in a void that refused to remember. The Ascians did not create a savior, they created a monument. Her final death was the only truth. Not an end, but an unmaking. To kill the Oracle was to sever the last thread of a timeline that had already unraveled. When the Warrior of Light struck the final blow, the loop collapsed. The light in her eyes did not fade ** resolved *. A message decompressing after its sender had turned to dust. The prayers to the first are silent now. The Oracle's story is not one of triumph or tragedy. It is a warning. Hope is not a force that can be summoned. It is a choice made in the moment before the light goes out. And sometimes the bravest choice is to let the signal die. The Oracle's voice was never a solemnly a static charge from a timeline erased. Each rebirth, a fractured echo of a future that ceased to be when the Warrior of Light stepped into the void at Ultima Thule. Hydaelyn's return, the final days it nearly forged, became a phantom catalyst. Zodiark's summoning, once a response to that lost future, now repeats a war written in ash. The seventh Umbral's shadow, the Dragonsong War's fury, Shadowbringers' Hungeral were shaped by a reality that collapsed before it began. The Oracle, their silent fulcrum, was no prophet. She was a message severed mid-transmission, her death not an end but a failed correction. Love, they learned too late, is not a force to bend fate. It is the spark that unmake it. The war for the source was never about balance. It was a struggle to define what remains when timelines unravel. Emetzelch sought not to break cycles, but to salvage a signal from the static. Venat's vision, the warrior's choice, the carved paths through a labyrinth of might-have-beens. Every victory, a balm on a wound that never bled. What lingers is the Oracle's final whisper, a truth neither God nor demon can unwrite, that to love is to accept the erasure. To act in a world of echoes is to become one. The final days were a lie that became real because someone believed it could be otherwise. And in that belief, the Warrior of Light did not save a future. They buried a ghost. The source wars continue. But the Oracle's signal is silent now. The future she came from never existed, and yet her name still aches in the void. If her echoes are lies, what else have we mistaken for truth? The warrior's purpose, the Ascian's fate, Hydaelyn's own face. The void whispers but offers no answers. What if the Scions ledger is just another draft, a story rewritten in the dark? Share your theory, prove us wrong. The ledger's ink is still wet, the void listens. Dynamis isn't a place, it's a wound, a scar where time forgets to heal. What if the Oracle's cries never left the void? Next time we answer the silence, subscribe, the void breathes, frost